Hello and welcome to this live YouTube session from the University of Leeds, where we will discuss the changing anatomy of digital education, drawing on both our practitioner and research-based experience. The session will provide an overview of blended learning and how the range of internet-enabled digital resources can support both the student experience and their engagement with their course. Specific details will cover the role of massive open online courses for both campus-based and distance learning. We'll look at the role of the educator and their interaction with students online. We'll also look at the use of a range of digital learning resources as part of the blended learning strategy here at Leeds, and also how students engage with these resources, drawing on some of the primary research that we have conducted. The session will conclude with some tips and advice for moving content online, which is becoming increasingly important given the current situation many higher education institutions are facing. The session will also be interactive, with the audience able to ask any questions. You should be able to see on the right-hand side chat bar where you can put any questions, and we will try to answer them at the end. You can also use the hashtag Digital Education Live, and we'll pick up those questions on Twitter as well. Beneath the screen, you'll also see there is a link to a number of research papers that we will talk about throughout today's session. So that's the formalities out of the way. I'd like to just quickly thank Ben and Jonathan, who behind the scenes are getting us online today, and then we'll quickly just introduce ourselves. So first of all, a few words about me. My name is James Pickering. I'm a professor of anatomical education at the University of Leeds, and I have a long-standing interest in the use of digital resources excuse me, to support the student experience, and specifically focusing on engagement and the impact that has on assessment and student outcomes. Excuse me. In this regard, I have, with colleagues, designed a whole series of digital education resources to include in my campus-based teaching primarily. These are included podcasts, screencasts, massive open online courses that we'll talk about more, ebooks, use of some of the many social media tools there are out there, and most recently, the use of mixed reality applications. It's through the development of these resources and some practitioner-based research around these to understand their role better that I've worked with both Bronwyn and Freshti, who are on this session as well. And I'll hand over to them both now, starting with Bronwyn, to introduce themselves. Hi, Bronwyn.
Just unmuting myself. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining this session. Really pleased to have you here. I'm Bronwyn Swinnerton, and I'm a Senior Research Fellow in Digital Education in the School of Education at the University of Leeds. I've worked in educational research for a lot of years now, and I became interested in digital education specifically as a result of a couple of roles that I had. One was a few years ago now, working on a project called World Class Tests, where we developed computer-based tests in maths and in problem solving. And later I worked in a role developing online training and educational resources, firstly for work-based training and then for university students. So my role now is as a researcher of digital education, and I've got three main areas to that role. I carry out research on a range of areas. I'm specifically interested in digital education in higher education and for workplace and lifelong learning. And at present, I've got particular interest in digital skills and how we can ensure that everyone has the skills they need for work and for life. I'm also engaged in a research fellowship in learning analytics, researching the implementation of a learning analytics system at the University of Leeds. The second part of my role is teaching. I teach on the part-time distance MA Digital Education. And then thirdly, I'm involved in developing digital education resources, including 3 MOOCs that have been completed, and I'm in the process of developing another one. And as part of my teaching, I also supervise doctoral students, which is how I know Freshti. So I was part of her supervision team when she was doing her PhD. And now that she's finished that, we're continuing to work together. So I'm now going to hand over to Freshti to introduce herself.
Hello, everyone, and thanks, Bronwyn. Yes, I was one of Bronwyn's PhD students, and I know James through my PhD project, as he was one of the participating educator in my project. My PhD focused on online educator, particularly MOOC educators, and their practices in relation to students' engagement. Generally, I've got a special interest in online educators and their practices. And in my other project, I looked into educators' uptake of educational technology in higher education. My other research interests are online communication, as I've got a background in linguistics, as well as co-creating digital learning spaces with students and other partners. Currently, I'm a lecturer in digital education at Manchester Metropolitan University, and I'm so excited to join Open University from next month as a lecturer in educational technology. That's about me. Over to James to give us an overview of digital education at Leeds.
Thanks, Vreshti. So, yeah, the University of Leeds is a large campus-based institution in the north of England here in the UK. And for a long time, it's adopted a blended learning strategy, a blended learning approach to its curriculum delivery. And I think now, as everyone's talking about higher education and delivery, it is important to be clear on definitions and really blended learning as opposed to online learning. Blended learning is where you have the majority of your teaching, if you're a student, kind of face-to-face, and that is supplemented with some digital education resources like ebooks, for example. And the university really has taken this blended learning strategy to its core, and it has developed a number of resources to support both staff and students to enhance that learning experience. So we have lecture capture facility, desktop capture, so colleagues, staff can provide resources both live and recorded for asynchronous delivery to students. But we also have a number of additional resources that are really coming into their own now, as obviously we are going through the current global pandemic and the situation we are in. So we have numerous software applications like Top Hat, for example, that enable in-class voting for campus, but also for formative and summative assessments, which are being used currently. But alongside that kind of software that we have available for staff and students to use to deliver the kind of learning journey, we also have some physical space. And we have developed a number of collaborative teaching spaces across the campus at Leeds, which do allow slightly more informal, less didactic learning experience for the students. So you really can move from the teacher to facilitator to change how that teaching is delivered. But importantly, and something that Leeds is very strong about, is about understanding how the technology fits into the pedagogy. So it's very much a pedagogically driven process. So we can identify a problem, we can identify an innovation, an enhancement, and then we wrap that up and understand the pedagogy behind it, and then find the most suitable tool to support student education. And actually, alongside all of these resources, alongside the physical spaces that I've spoken about, one of them that we haven't really touched on and will explore a lot more throughout this session is the use of massive open online courses, MOOCs. And I think Bronwyn is best placed to talk about those and their role and how Leeds has really developed those. So Bronwyn, over to you.
Thanks very much, James. Yes, so to begin with, I'm going to give you a little bit of background to the development of MOOCs at Leeds. We're very lucky at Leeds. The University of Leeds has a team dedicated to developing digital resources, and it's called the Digital Education Service, which are the guys behind the YouTube session today. And it's been developing a range of resources for probably 7 to 8 years now. And it developed its first MOOC in 2013, which was right at the beginning of the MOOC phenomenon. So for those less experienced with MOOCs and less knowledgeable about MOOCs, they are massive open online courses. They're standalone courses that can be accessed by learners all over the world. All that's needed is a device and an internet connection. And 2012 was hailed as the year of the MOOC. Many institutions were partnering with platforms such as Coursera and edX, both American platforms, to develop a huge range of courses, and they attracted thousands of learners, hence the massive. The IELTS MOOC attracted over 400,000 learners, and they were free. There were no requirements for entry. You didn't have to have any qualifications or experience, and that's the open. And Leeds was one of the first institutions to develop MOOCs with the Open University platform, FutureLearn. And to date, they've developed 77 courses for the platform. But that was 2012, 2013, which was 2012 was hailed as the year of the MOOC, when commentators suggested that they would disrupt higher education. Thousands of people were taking free courses. Why would you come to university? But things have changed since then. The number of learners has decreased by quite a lot, although MOOCs still have cohorts in hundreds or in thousands. And interestingly, there are a couple of MOOCs at the moment on the coronavirus. One's from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Disease, and one from the University of Edinburgh. And they've both got over 20,000 learners on these MOOCs. But generally, numbers had started to decline before COVID. And they're no longer as free as they were, with many MOOCs having fees if you want long-term access or if you want a certificate. And now many MOOC platforms are partnering to develop accredited, paid-for courses to earn micro-credentials or even degrees. And Leeds has been involved in developing all these types of courses. And I should say as well that MOOCs are on a really wide range of subjects. Leeds has developed MOOCs on World War I, physical theatre, there's a recent one on coding, and then there's the anatomy MOOC, which is what we're going to focus on more today. And most MOOCs, whatever their format, tend to have an educator present to help guide the discussions, although not all of them do. Leeds has got a series of short MOOCs which are aimed at schools, and they don't have educator presence. But generally, most MOOCs do, and the educator will be the person who's helped develop it. And I've been an educator on 3 MOOCs, and you'll see that James was an educator on the anatomy MOOC. And this is where Fresh Day's PhD research comes in, because she focused on the role of educators in MOOCs. So I'm now going to pass over to Fresh Day, who will tell you more about her research.
Thanks, Bronwyn. Before I talk about my research, I'd like to say a little bit about educators and their role in massive open online courses. Educators, as one of the human elements of an educational experience, play a critical role in facilitating different aspects of learning, even in MOOCs, which are designed based on collaborative and self-regulated learning. A big part of their role starts when they are designing the course and they have to make decisions about the content, about the level of subject matter, about the opportunities for different types of interaction assessments, and even the teaching team that they're going to work with. Their role at this stage is as important as their role when they are delivering the course, because, for example, a successful and fruitful discussion among students very much depends about their decision when they are designing a discussion task or discussion leading. Having said that, my research project focused on educators when they are delivering the course and when they interact with students. And whether students engage with them or not. This is a very important aspect of online learning in general, because too many of learner-educator interaction can reduce students' self-regulation, attempts towards meaning-making, and also efforts to achieve their academic goal. And too few of such interactions can lead to learner inability to complete the learning task, and can also lead to frustration and demotivation of students, and maybe dropping out from the course. In my study, I looked at what educators say and do in MOOC discussion areas and how learners engage with them. I look at a big data set of around 820 conversations, and I also interviewed educators, and I found that the majority of educators' contributions are social, and they are socially focused, and much fewer conversations focus on content or the pedagogical support that students need. So this generally means 2 things. First, the social support and the academic or content-related support that students receive in MOOCs are not equal. And second, because they receive lower level of academic or content-related support, it means that they don't have enough scaffolding, or they don't have enough support to move through higher levels of critical thinking or understanding. Before I talk about the second part of my finding, I'd like to ask James about his experience as an educator and whether these findings match his activities in discussion areas, because I clearly remember that James in his communication used a lot of emojicons, which we consider as kind of social cues in communications. So James, do you have any comment about this?
Well, so I use emojis for a number of reasons, really, but the most important one was I wanted the learners, once they'd put a comment on the platform, I wanted them to know that it had been read, it had been recognized, and the person at the other end of on the other side of the screen had actually seen it. So, you know, there was, it's quite complex, because I think the MOOC I did was the second one the university runs, so we were kind of trying to work out the role of the educators and how much influence they should have. And I was very enthusiastic about making sure that the learners had a good experience. So when I was on there, I really wanted to think, well, if the learners have taken a lot of effort to come onto the course, then I wanted to acknowledge that they'd put a comment on. Now, whether it was just a statement or it was a question that had been answered by other learners, I wanted to recognize that. So I often just used a thumbs up. There was the like button you could hit. So I'd always hit that, but I'd read the comment, and then I put a smiley face or a thumbs up, just really to recognize. I think that level of social interaction, not necessarily the academic interaction that you spoke about, was really important, so they didn't feel they were just kind of lost in the MOOC by themselves, and there was someone else out there who was actually engaging with them. So I thought it was really really important. It did take a lot of work, and you know, the educator side of this is important to recognize, but I thought it was worthwhile.
True. Thanks very much, James. Validating and acknowledging what students say is very important for their learning. For my study, I also looked at whether learners engage with what educator says or not. And by engagement, I mean whether they like an educator's comments, or they're going to respond to an educator comments. And when we look at the slide, if Jonah, you put the slides for me, I found that, to my surprise, that students do not engage with the majority. As you can see, they didn't engage with 58% of educators' contribution. And I am thinking that's most likely because they do not either meet learners' need, or they are, as James said, they are kind of acknowledging and validating type rather than demanding a student response. The data also show that the most engagement occurs when an educator contribution is social and have a high level of kind of interpersonal communication. By contrast, I found that contributions that include a combination of social and content-related or academic support are the ones that students really, really engage with. And now again, I'd like to ask James that whether learners engage with certain type of his comment or his contribution more than others, and whether he can see a reason for that.
Yeah, again, question for Esti, and I think it's complicated, as everything is quite complicated in moving on to this kind of online area. I think it does depend very much on the type of MOOC and the content that's being delivered as part of that MOOC. So, and that did form some of the design principles that we had when we developed it. So it was an anatomy MOOC. So a lot of the questions that were on the platform were very fact-based. So a lot of them were, what is this structure? What does this structure do? What is its blood supply? What is its nerve supply, for example? And that could be very much a closed question, which I'd just give a straightforward answer to. But actually, although there was a place for that, there was also an opportunity through various discussions that we put into the platform, come to those a bit later on, that allowed the learners to actually explore and bring their own views to the platform. That did get a little bit tricky at times. Some people did reveal some very personal insights into their own health and well-being, which was something that we had to be very delicate. But also, a lot of the learners out there went and did a lot of high-level research, went to some very detailed papers and brought that onto the platform for the discussion. So for my MOOC, my experience really was there was two. There was the simple fact-checking, yes, no, closed kind of commentary questions, but then there was also, and again, the way we designed the MOOC, a real opportunity to really dive deep into the richness of the human body that we were talking about, that people, I do think, find just intuitively quite quite interesting. I think they like to understand what lies underneath the skin. So I think in that context, it is kind of MOOC specific how the platform would work.
Thanks very much, James. You just talk about your experience as an educator on MOOC, and can you tell us a little bit more about the MOOC that you developed?
Yes, happily. So it's probably best, and I think you saw some video that was rolled in a moment ago, which was some of the clips and some of the videos that we used for the MOOC. But if we could just put the second slide in, Jonathan, that would be helpful, because this outlines the course map that we had for this MOOC, the second MOOC the university put in place, exploring anatomy, the human abdomen. And it was a MOOC that went on for 3 weeks, and within each week there were 3 activities. You can see there in orange, pink and blue. And the first 2 activities were about disseminating knowledge, information, and that was very much about an area of the body. And then the final activity in blue, we brought in a clinician, a surgeon. So on the MOOC we had a general surgeon looking at inguinal hernia repair in the lower abdomen. I think in week 2 we had a histopathologist looking at resecting parts of the colon to look for various aspects of cancer. We also had a radiologist come on in week 3, and they were talking about approaching the liver and the blood supply to treat liver cancer using radiological techniques. So we brought in those clinicians that really add flavour and some real world examples of why understanding the basic anatomy was so important. So each week, 3 activities followed the same format. First 2 activities were knowledge based, lots of videos that we put at 3 different levels: introductory, kind of intermediate, and advanced. After each of those activities, there was a number of questions for learners to check their understanding. Obviously, they could go back and then look at the videos again. And after each individual activity, there was a number of discussion elements where where learners, beg your pardon, could go and bring in their own examples of information they'd found. They could ask some questions, and as you can see on the screen here, I'm having an interview with 2. There's Dermot, there's a general surgeon, and there's Nick from the trust here in Leeds, and they're both looking at how we can work together, how clinicians work together to deal with these real world problems. But fundamentally, it was understanding the basic anatomy and then exploring it within that clinical setting. So each week had the same activities, and we had that live. We developed it. It's rolled out maybe 5 or 6 times now, and we embedded it into our blended learning curriculum for our medical students here at Leeds. So it was open to everyone in the world to access and have a look at the course, but we also integrated it to coincide with the medical curriculum that we have. And that was really interesting, because we like to know the value, the impact of these technologies into our campus-based students. And because of that, Bronwyn and myself, we pulled together a research project, and we started looking at, in a quite descriptive way, how the students were engaging with that. And I think Bronwyn's going to give a few more details about that project. Bronwyn.
Thanks very much, James. Yes, I'll just talk a little bit about the research that I've done around MOOCs, and then I'll move on to the study that James and I did. So when James and I decided to do this study, I'd already done quite a bit of research around MOOCs. I was really interested when they first appeared as to who took them, what were their motivations, and I was really interested in the extent to which learners got involved in the discussion areas. There was a lot on in the media about how lots of people would take MOOCs and not finish them. And I was interested if those who made more comments were more engaged and therefore more likely to stay in the MOOC for longer. So I was really interested in that idea of engagement. And MOOCs do have a wide range of different types of learners, using them for lots of different reasons. So you might have learners thinking about going to do a formal course at a university, and they take a MOOC to get a feel for the subject, for the academics, for the institution. Or there might be people in work who want to use MOOCs to upskill. And we also know that students on formal courses use MOOCs. We knew that before James had done it. But we were particularly interested in how this MOOC might be used with higher education students at Leeds on the medical degree. So James encouraged his first year medical students to enrol on the MOOC during its second run, and we set up a study. And it was a research study where we were trying to answer one particular research question. What impact does a MOOC have on campus-based medical students in regard to, firstly, their engagement, but also is there a difference in that by gender? Because there were some research studies out at that time that said there were different levels of engagement by gender. So the medical students who took the MOOC were asked to take part in a mixed method study, which consisted of a survey, followed by a smaller group of those students were invited to take part in a focus group. I'm not going to go into the methodology too much because you can read about that in the paper, but I'll just talk through some of the main findings. Can you put up slide 3, please? Thank you. So this looks a bit complicated, but it's not that complicated really. We looked at 4 different things. Did students follow the course pathway? So as when James was showing you the structure of the MOOC, it was by 3 weeks. Each of the weeks has within it steps. And the suggested route through any MOOC is to follow step 1 to step 2 to step 3, etc. But that isn't necessarily the way you have to do it. You can jump about, you can go to the bits that you're particularly interested in. So this first A graph shows you, did the C is, did they follow it completely, moderately, sometimes, not really, not at all. And the blue and the red, the blue is male and the red is female. And what you can see is that females were much more likely to not really follow it and not at all. They tended to personalise their journey through the MOOC much more so than males did. Then the second thing we were interested in was which bits of the MOOC did they use? And so in a lot of MOOCs, you have different levels of content because, as I said, you get a real wide range of learners. So in this MOOC, there was introductory material, core material, and advanced material. And the majority of these students used the advanced material. And that's not surprising. They were already on a course where they had a lot of the basic and core materials already covered. And they were using this to get some supplementary advanced material. But what you can see here is that no males access the introductory material. And then if we look at the last 2 graphs, they were looking at the level of engagement. When did learners go onto it and how long did they go onto it for? And it tended to be that about 80% went on it maybe once or twice a week, and then a much smaller proportion, 20%, went on it more often. And when they did go on it, it tended to be for up to an hour at a time, that most people, and there were not really any difference there by gender. So what we also asked them was, what do you think about the resources? Do you think they're good quality? Do you think they were of value to you? Did you like the fact that they were available to you? And they all said yes, they thought they were really good quality resources. And then we asked them about the different aspects of the MOOC, which bits they liked, which bits they didn't like so much. And they really liked the tests. A lot of MOOCs have tests at intermittent points within a MOOC to assess progress and to assess your understanding. And they really liked those. What they didn't get involved with were the discussion areas. And we looked into this in more detail in the focus group. And they said, well, we don't need to. We've got our own community. We're on campus every day. We can ask each other questions over coffee. If we've got any issues we want to discuss further, we can do that. But a lot of people who go onto MOOCs don't have that. They don't have a cohort or a community to discuss with. And so that was interesting that they didn't use those. But one person said, well, I felt overwhelmed by the thousands of people that were in the MOOC, and I didn't really want to go into the discussion areas because why would anybody want to hear what I've got to say? Because I'm a student and they're much more learned than I am. And I think that isn't the case at all, but it's interesting that that was their perception. And then the final thing that they said was, that was a really useful resource, but we don't want it to replace what we already have. We don't want it to replace the work with cadavers or the lectures, etc., and the resources we have at the campus. We like it as a supplementary, but we don't want it to replace anything. So we'd learned a little bit about engagement with MOOCs, and this really whet our appetite. So then we moved on to a second study, which now James is going to talk about more.
Yeah, thanks, Bronwyn. I just wonder, excuse me, I just wonder if we could perhaps just have a look at Charlotte's question. I think Charlotte's put a question in the chat. Yeah, thanks, Jonathan, for putting it online. And please do keep putting questions in the chat, and we'll answer them either as we're going along or towards the end. So Charlotte asks, is it important to have the same weekly format throughout a MOOC, a course that's delivered online? I'll hand over to Bronwyn and Freshti if they've got any comments. But I suppose my view initially would be, I don't think you need to be wedded to a specific weekly structure. I think you can adjust the structure as you need to get across various content, or you need to open up for discussion. The one thing I think is incredibly important, especially as we move more content online, is to make sure the students are really clear at the beginning of the week or the fortnight as to what that journey over the next few weeks is going to be. So if there's a number of activities which are content delivery or tests or discussions or activities to go offline, asynchronous group work, I think the most important thing is making it clear that the students know what that week holds, is in front of the students for that week. Bronwyn, you're nodding. Do you have a comment to add?
I was going to say that last point that you made, that it's really important that the students know what the expectation is, that they know what's in front of them, and that they don't get surprised. So they know whether it's a collaborative activity, or it might be a peer review, or it might just be read some materials and then go and explore further. But I think also I think it's important not to have the same weekly format. I think it's important to vary what you do, and possibly to advance a bit more. So to begin with, you might be giving some content that lays out the basic content that students need to know, and then you can get them to do more collaborative and more interesting work together as you move through. I saw Freshti nodding. Did you want to add anything there?
I just have one very small point. I agree with both of you, but at the same time, it's a process of negotiating in order to keep students engaged. Yes, they need to have a level of certainty to know what is coming, but if it's in week 2 and they think that this type of activity works better, so probably, yes, have a kind of fixed structure, but at the same time, be flexible to negotiate based on students' needs. And sometimes this needs evolves as the course progresses.
Okay. Another question. All these questions are coming in now. This is not. Is there any way? We'll have a word with Jonathan and Ben. Is there any way to encourage students to participate in discussions, especially those who keep quiet and just read comments? What types of discussion tasks do encourage participation in discussions? I think I can just start to flesh that out while if you think of an answer as well, Bronwyn Freshti. I suppose it is about, again, at the beginning, if having that discussion is important for that learning journey, then I think it's really important to set the expectations to the students. So this is what we're doing. This is how we're doing it using these discussion forums. This is why we're doing it, linking it back to the learning objectives, and then setting out the expectations that this is only going to work if we have this rich conversation. So we would really like it if you could, get in touch, contribute, and that can be in multiple different ways. It doesn't have to be people turning on their video and turning on their audio to necessarily contribute, because obviously not everyone has the same technology and internet access, but it could be making sure chat functions are open. Also, if you have just a list of people's names, if you actually have a bit of not necessarily a cold call, but a bit of a lukewarm, a bit of a warmish call to say, John, I'm going to come to you in 5 minutes if it's okay for you to kind of think of an answer, and really just try and control the setting that you're in. But setting expectations is key for me. Bronwyn Freshti, do you have anything to add?
I'm conscious of time, so I added a very quick point about students who just read, and we call them lurkers. These students, it may be their learning preference that they prefer to read, take notes, and not engage. But studies show that the reason behind lurking, in addition to learning preference, is sometimes students do not have that social or academic confidence to add a comment or to contribute to discussion. And I think as an educator, throughout the course, it is your responsibility to realize what are those barriers and try to minimize those barriers. That's what I want to add, and I think we can get back to these after we cover other stuff.
Yeah, so let's make some progress, and we've got some tips, and maybe hopefully have some time at the end we can explore that. Excuse me. So yeah, Bronwyn asked me about the kind of second study that we've looked at, and what we were trying to do here is really dive a bit deeper into engagement, and not necessarily just with the MOOC, but with other learning resources that we had through our virtual learning environment, our LMS, wherever you are. And we had the MOOC there as well. This was supplementary as part of our blended learning strategy. And we had our traditional didactic lectures, active learning elements within those, our dissection-based practical classes. And then it was supplemented with this MOOC, an ebook, and a YouTube channel with lots of resources. And we wanted to see how students engaged generally, not just with the MOOC, but generally with these TAL resources. And then we tried to weed out if there was any differences in engagement relating to those individual resources, and if there's any impact on assessment outcomes. So Jonathan, if you could bring up slide number 4. Yeah, so what we did to try and explore this engagement is we looked at the literature, obviously, and I think it's common within higher education and elsewhere for engagement to really be across 3 dimensions. You've got behavioral, emotional, and cognitive. So we were interested to see if we could find similar levels of engagement with, or types of engagement with, our resources. So we did use some validated scales on self-regulated learning and student engagement, and we whittled those down into a survey, and then we released that to the students. And all the detail and the methodology is in the paper that you can access underneath the video. And what we did is we did some exploratory factor analysis where all of the items, the questions in the survey, are essentially all bundled together into some groups to give you an overall collection of items, and you can then create a theme. So these are just some kind of results that we had, and you can access those in the paper. And you can see there are 3 distinct clusters in blue, yellow, and green there. And that was about satisfaction, goal setting and planning, and physical interaction. So if we just go to the next slide, then what you can see is having those items all clustered together, we could then, if you bring up the first one, Jonathan, we could then give them a name, and we called that satisfaction. You can see some of the information there, and that very much relates to the extent in which the students were really willing to engage and seek out their desire to locate these TAL resources. And that's what we drew from those items, and we labeled that satisfaction. Students essentially enjoyed engaging with these resources. That very closely matched to that emotional engagement that you see in the literature. If you look at the next one, please, Jonathan, then this one we called goal setting and planning, which very much aligned with cognitive engagement, in that the items kind of referred to students using these TAL resources in a very thoughtful way. They were using them to set short and long-term goals. They were really immersing themselves, looking at learning objectives, seeking out the TAL resources to really get the most out of them. And then the final one really went down to behavioural engagement. It was the weakest of the factors and hardest to actually give a nice, clear name to. But we did call this physical interaction because students weren't passively kind of using these resources. They were making notes, they were testing themselves, and these were the themes that came out of those items. So what we did is we took those 3 levels of engagement and we applied them across the MOOC, the ebook, and YouTube resources. And we did find that of those 3, YouTube was the most popular. That's probably not surprising. YouTube is very straightforward to get to. For a MOOC and for an ebook, you have to go through logins and then work your way through a new platform, whereas YouTube is quite intuitive. And the same for the ebook. You have to go and download it, and it's a new tool you have to learn. So we weren't surprised when we found YouTube was the highest. But interestingly, when we did the analysis to look at those students who were most engaged after taking this survey, we did find that those students who were most engaged did go to the MOOC, indicating that they were prepared to go that bit further to actually take this resource. Importantly, though, we also found when we did some correlation analysis to look at the assessment outcomes, there wasn't any difference in those who engaged with the different resources and their assessment outcomes, which essentially is a good thing. We want to know that, you know, using various tools is not harmful to the students for their learning. But if they're up there with everything else, then that's important to know. You know, we're not treating technology to any higher standard, but it has got an important role to play. That does lead on to more research questions, as I'm sure you can imagine. If we just look at the last slide I've got, you know, we're really asking, what does this all mean? And perhaps slight bit of a cop-out, but it is complicated. Looking at that, as you see in the literature, engagement, you know, is perhaps not the most reliable proxy for learning. And I think we can see that engagement from this study is more complicated. But also, we've got the context of our students. Our medical students are high achieving, highly motivated students taking on high stakes courses. So what we actually found is that the shift kind of rightwards was that these students were all engaged. Therefore, we didn't have those lower engaged students, which may have brought out some more correlation. But that's just a kind of a brief overview of that, the research findings that we found when Brom and I were doing that research. And that really has led to a number of tips that we've published with colleagues from various universities in Europe. And I'll hand over to Bronwyn to talk about some of those tips.
Thanks, James. Yes, so we've published 2 papers, both of which have got 12 tips in about using MOOCs. I'm going to talk through a few of those tips, just 5, and then Fresh Day is going to talk about some tips related to her research. So because lots of us are now moving online, we're having to teach online, I think MOOCs are definitely something you could start to use. And the first tip would be clearly define what content you want to include in your course. So before you even start looking for MOOCs and for MOOC content, it's really important to have a clear view of what you're looking for. You may think you know this, you know what it is you're looking for, but it's worth writing it down. What are the areas that are lacking or would benefit from some supplementary material? And also think about, what do you want your students to do? What sort of activities? As you've heard, as we've gone through this session, there are different activities within MOOCs. They could be reading, they could be watching videos, go off and explore some resources, discuss with each other, collaborate or peer review. So think about what you think might be useful for your students to be doing and create a 1-page detailed description of the integration that you're looking to establish. The second tip is search for MOOCs on that topic and also try to gauge the credibility of the MOOC before deciding to use it. You can search for MOOCs in a number of different ways. You can go onto a website called Class Central or a website called MOOC List, and you can just look for particular areas or keywords, or you can go to the actual platform website. So you could go to the FutureLearn website or Coursera, edX, Udacity, and you could just look at what MOOCs they have. And then you can look around it. So if you were looking for an anatomy MOOC, you might look under medicine and health sciences, not just anatomy. You should also think about the institution that you're interested in, the start date, the length, and the hours of study per week. MOOCs really vary from anything of 2 weeks up to 8 or 10 weeks. And they often have different start dates. They don't run all the time. So, for example, you might get the current coding MOOC for March, but then it's not run again till September. So you need to make sure it's open and available. And also the hours of study can vary, 4 hours, 8 hours, etc. So you need to think about what amount of time do your students have. And then think about the level that you want, and are you interested in whether it's credited, whether it's got a certificate, and are your students interested in that? And then it's also important to take a look at that particular MOOC. And then you've got to think about the credibility, the quality of it. Who are the educators? and which institution is it from, that's a really good place to start. It can give you a good idea of the quality. It's institutions with prominent world-leading academics probably wouldn't allow a poor course to be made available, so that's quite a good place to start. The third tip is ensure that the MOOC content is freely available for your students. As I said earlier, MOOCs started out as being open, there were no prerequisites, you just needed a device, internet connection, and they were free. But increasingly, they're not free. Aspects of the MOOC experience are being placed behind a paywall. There's a financial cost attached to obtaining a certificate or to having access for longer than the time that the MOOC is open. And also, yes, you used to be able to have future access and now you can't. You tend to, if a MOOC say 3 weeks, you might get a week after that. Whereas before you used to have unlimited future access. So it's really important to check what those access rules are, because you don't want to suggest a resource for your students and then they go to it and it's no longer accessible to them. The fourth point is make sure you align the goals, the teaching activities and the assessments. So it's important to suggest a MOOC content that aligns with the formal course it will be supplementing or integrating with. It would be quite disconcerting for your students if the level's too basic or it's too advanced or not aligned to the curriculum that they're expecting to study. The more aligned it is, the more likely your students are to use it and to gain benefit from using it. But saying that, you don't want it to be exactly the same. You do want it to add some value. And if there is an assessment involved in the MOOC, do you want your students to do it? And if you do, you might get them to do it outside of the MOOC so that you can provide feedback. And then my final tip is to provide clear instructions to students on how to enrol onto the MOOC and how to utilise the MOOC and its instructions. I can imagine that many students are not familiar with MOOCs, and so it's good practice to provide some information as to why you're suggesting this as an additional resource and what area of the curriculum it's relevant to. Also tell them how it's structured, how to navigate through, and also do you want them to go through it in the suggested way and cover every step? Or are you asking them to go in, have a look at what they think is useful and use those particular pieces of content? And then make sure you provide the URL and explain that they'll be required to enrol onto it and let students know when they must register by and that they'll need to create a personal account with the host platform. And then let them know how long they've got access for. So they're my 5 tips. There are many more in the 2 papers. And I'm now going to hand over to Freshte because she'll talk about some of the learnings from her research.
Thanks very much, Bronwyn. Yes, I'd like to focus on educators and what they can do to enhance students' engagement. My first tip is to ensure that you provide a balanced educator presence, which meets both students' social and also academic and content-related needs. And this may be different at different points during the course. For example, at the beginning, you may need more kind of social support. So students build this interpersonal relationship, they feel confident about participating, and then you can reduce the level of your social kind of support and add more to academic and content-related support that really helps their learning and also their critical thinking. My second point is about when you provide academic or content-related support, again, make sure it is balanced in sense of facilitating students' learning as well as challenging their understanding and their thinking. What happens in discussion areas, in many cases, educators just facilitate students' conversation and they really do not challenge. And this challenge can be by posing questions, by showing students the area of agreement and disagreement within discussion and discuss them further and ask students to defend, for example, their position. And my last point is about choosing the discussion task and designing discussion task or prompts, which are really, really important in having a productive and fruitful discussion. Try to choose discussion tasks that encourage turn-taking and kind of collaboration among students. Tasks that require students to reflect back on the content and then personalize it to their own context. tasks that ask for the recall of information or have just one right answer are not going to help with creating a kind of lengthy discussion that elicits different types of opinion. That was what I want to tell you about educators, and I'll pass over to James to conclude the session.
Okay, thanks, Betty. And yes, there's, as Bronwyn said, the papers are these tips papers are, you can find them as a link underneath the screen. So go there and you can download the papers. And there's also some of the research findings that we've got that we've done. We've put them there as well. So the comment section is still open. So please do put your comments in the chat, and we can come to them. And also you can tweet with the hashtag digital education online, and we'll pick those up as well. So if you want to put some questions in, please do that. Bronwyn, what's our next project going to be about? We're going to kind of carry on this theme of looking at MOOCs and general digital education resources, and we're going to explore UTaught. What are our next steps?
Yes, we've got another project on the go at the moment. So what we found out was that students like to use these materials, and we looked at what they did with them. But I was really interested as to why they use them and maybe why people don't use them. So UTaught is an adoption theory, the unified theory of acceptance and use of technology. And we were using UTaught 2, which has got 6 or 7 different constructs within it. One was price value, but because they're not paying for this, we took price value out. But the constructs within that are performance expectancy. Do you, by using this technology, think you'll be able to do your task better? So for that, we're thinking, are they using MOOCs because they think they'll get a higher mark? Do they think they'll learn better? Another construct is effort expectancy. So how much effort does it take to enroll in a MOOC, understand how it works? Is that putting them off, or is that something that they're saying, no, it wasn't too much effort? Because if it is, you can start thinking about downloading that material for them out of the MOOC and give it to them a different way. Social influence is also another construct, and we wondered whether people use the MOOC because James suggested they should use the MOOC, him being their lecturer. So that's a really interesting point as to whether somebody whose opinion you care about is suggesting you use that technology. So we'll be able to explore that a bit further.
Bronwyn, just jump in. That's a really important point, really, isn't it? Because
it is.
I think, we may not realise it as teachers, as lecturers, but we do have a really powerful position. And if we say this resource, that resource, the students will think, well, if the teacher has recommended this resource, this must be really important and linked to the assessment. So the onus is on us, therefore, to make sure we are giving them high quality, accurate resources, especially if we're taking stuff off from online into our courses that we haven't developed ourselves. Especially as we move forward, putting more content online. I think it's really important we do, when we're curating those resources, make sure they do match the learning objectives. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And I think what happened with your MOOC was that you knew the content, you knew it inside out, and you knew it was related to the course, because that's why you thought of giving it, suggesting that your students use it. But if you're just going out there into the ether of looking for things, it is more important that you check that it really does align, that it's good quality, and that it will be useful for your students. Because if you suggest that they use something and they spend 2 hours and at the end of it think, well, that wasn't any good, that's not helpful for anybody.
Yeah, and I think
sorry.
That's okay. There has been a few studies out there where people have gone and they've used a kind of some keywords to download all of the resources that relate to a chest examination, and then assess them for their accuracy, and found that there are significant gaps. Yeah, sorry, I interrupted you.
I was going to say that's part of our role, isn't it? To make sure that we sift the rubbish from the quality, because we can do that and our students might not be able to.
Yeah, okay. So a few minutes left. So if you want to put a question in, please do. Freshte, you mentioned at the beginning that you're moving off to the OU, the Open University. Are you looking to carry on the same sort of theme of research that you have been doing when you're there?
I've been engaged. I'm going to be engaged with other projects, but because I'm going to Open University and that's the home for Future Learn, I'm hoping that I can carry on my research on MOOCs, especially in discussion areas. I really want to do a study of looking into MOOCs which involve educators and those which do not involve educators, as Bronwyn mentioned at the beginning of her talk about school MOOCs. And I want to see whether educators really make a difference in quality of learning by looking at the conversations again and applying the community of inquiry framework and the cognitive development theories. That's one thing. And the other thing, Future Learn MOOCs are based on conversational framework, and different type of discussions within the course are devised to address different types of learning. And I want to see which one is more effective and encourage students' participation and students' learning. Overall, I'm very, very excited about that.
Okay, well, good luck. I'm sure,
thank you.
Very fantastic. So yeah, and keep in touch. Let us know how it does develop. I think Charlotte has been back on. Thank you, Charlotte. Is there such a thing as too much collaboration during online learning? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. Is there too much collaboration? Freshty
knows the answer.
Yeah, because I was reading about it this morning and I got very excited to see that question. There can be too much online collaboration in the sense that students talk at the stage of exchanging idea, and that's all they are doing. They get information, they explore different opinions, different perspectives, but they don't go any further. And that's the article I was reading about, was the role of educator and helping students to get out of this exploration phase and move higher, to integrate this information and to apply it to a context. So yes, there can be too much collaboration during online learning, in the sense that it makes students stuck at a certain level of learning and not going higher. And it is, again, the educator's role, as well as the discussion tasks that need to be targeted towards the higher level of learning. If you're familiar with the community of inquiry framework and practical inquiry, it looks at learning at the different stages of learning at four levels. And the lower level are triggering event, when students see a problem or we give them a problem or a discussion or a task to discuss. And then they go and explore about it, they exchange ideas, and that's where most of the discussions stay. We need to help students to move higher, to integrate this information, and finally to find a solution either for that problem or say where they can apply this knowledge.
Perfect. Thanks, Preshti and Charlotte. I hope that answers your question. So we are rapidly approaching the top of the hour. So I think we will say thank you and goodbye. Thanks for engaging, participating with the session. I hope you've enjoyed it and have been able to take a few things away from this to support you over the next few weeks if you're moving your content online. So goodbye from me, Bronwyn, Freshti.
Bye. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Okay.